Well, we'll get started. So I'm Drew from the CPD Standards Office, although my email is Andrew, which is my actual name, my Sunday name normally when I'm in trouble from my mother or something like that. So please call me Drew or Andrew, whatever. And yeah, I'll be hosting together with Mark and Anu and my colleague Kirsty this morning. So yeah, just a bit of house rules. First of all, we are recording, so if we do have network issues, we drop out or we have to jump on another call or an inquiry or anything like that, don't worry about it. The recording will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel as normal. And there will be some interaction in today's presentation from Mark and Anu. There'll be some polling, there'll be some Q&As that will be taking place as well. That's factored into the presentation. If you have a question throughout, please pop it into the chat at the bottom. If the moment is right and relevant to answer as we go, we'll do it. If not, we'll answer those questions at the end to save stifling the flow of Mark and Anu's presentation. So today we are talking from Kubicle, unlocking the hidden value of data literacy in the workplace, and this hands me nicely over to Mark. So Mark, morning, and over to you.
Excellent, Drew. You're not in trouble, so it's not Andrew today. We'll stick with it. But thanks for the introduction. Yeah, so I mean, due to the sort of intimate nature of this group today, we might save the polling, and we might in fact even go to the floor and put people in the hot seat for a short period of time, maybe to respond in real time to perhaps some of the questions that we'd like to poll, or at least bring forward to the audience. But for the next 45 minutes or so, Anu and I are going to be taking you through a high-level overview of data literacy and the importance of data literacy in the business setting, and how we think you as individuals and business leaders perhaps should be thinking about education within your organization, or even just as an individual lifelong learner. Why are we of the belief that we're qualified to talk to you about this subject? Well, Anu and I are, along with all the other Kubicle staff, we're on a mission to democratize data knowledge by making online data training in data analytics essentially accessible to everybody, enabling all people to thrive in the modern workplace. And we're doing this through our e-learning product, and you can learn more about that. All the information available on our website, and that's Kubicle with a K. But furthermore, by way of introduction, I'm the CEO, and Anu is Senior Account Manager and basically manages all the relationships of our top tier customers and clientele, and supports them with data literacy programming. So as far as our agenda is concerned, we're going to take you through a three-part series or a three-part schedule. Firstly, we're going to be building on some environmental and economical context around why data literacy is important. Then we're going to be looking at ways in which data literacy is essentially enabling organizations to do some pretty amazing things. And we'll also touch on what can happen if data literacy is ignored. And lastly, we're going to share some best practices on how data and how business leaders rather can start to think about introducing data literacy and data literacy programming into the strategic agenda of the organization. So without further ado, this is one of these things that we're going to kind of throw out to the audience, and we're going to take a moment to ask the question of, in a definition sense, what does data literacy mean to you? Now, you can either respond by, I don't know, unmuting yourself. Is that possible? Do we give you control to do that yourselves? Or you can do so by just adding some commentary in the chat. I don't know, Drew, what's possible.
I think we can add some commentary in the chat. Mark can capture people's interpretations of that definition there. So yeah, Andre and Keen, please feel free to put down in the chat there by definition what this means to you.
There is no wrong answer.
There is no wrong answer, and if there is something that we are way off on, I'm sure you're gonna pointers in the right direction, Mark.
Yeah. That's interesting from keen use of the computer and information keyed in. So we're going to talk actually a little bit about the role of tooling within the data literacy program. That's definitely a part of it. Anu is responding there. I would expect you to know a thing or two about this, Anu. So thank you for your response of using data within an organization to make decisions. Absolutely. The ability to read, understand, sorry, there was one there from the CPD that was on point, and I think it is directly from Google, because that is exactly the same as our definition, which too is from Google, although we have some obviously tweaks and improvements to it. But being able to cut through the data generated and getting basic premise of what is really important for a company or an org to function. Very good. Point term on how to use data in line with GDPR. Yes, a very scary term for many there, but necessary in the interest of privacy and confidentiality and understanding.
And Richard's definition there, quite on point, understanding data and what it means and how it can support decision making. Yeah,
all very good answers. A++ even for everybody. And from the CPD audience, completely on point, in that the kind of Oxford standard definition is the ability to read, work, argue, and understand and communicate with data. And we're kind of making as a business, the business case that data literacy should be a competency, that definition should be a competency that today everyone should have. And why is that? Well, over the last decade, and particularly over the last couple of years, as we're going to show you, we've experienced a pretty pivotal shift in how data is being used to drive business decisions, as some of the definitions alluded to on every level. And some of the reasons as to why this kind of importance is climbing is because environmentally, access to data and data tooling, again, something that was mentioned in the definitions, or people's perception of the definition of data literacy, this too is also changing. So to look at some of these market forces that are kind of playing a part towards driving data-informed decisions, as you can see in the middle there. First of all, is that we've got this kind of rise of self-service analytics tools. It used to be that complex data processes could only be pursued by data professionals within an organization. These would be, data analysts or data scientists even. But now we're finding that the capabilities of some of the self-service tools are advancing at such an extraordinary rate that work that was once being conducted only by those specialist data teams can now, at least in part, be done by the business generalist. So you may have heard of some terminology like no code and low code, or the rise of low code and the rise of no code. Well, this is really about enabling non-technical people to do some very technical things with not much more than a simple point and a click on a PC. Today, for example, we have websites that are being generated by individuals and teams through web applications without any requirement for an understanding of programming languages like HTML. And then we also have the likes of data democratization. Data in the workplace used to be housed on servers that were behind the lock and key of a chief technology officer or a chief data officer. Well, this still in some instances is the case, again, where privacy and confidentiality concerns exist. Less sensitive data is now being stored in databases, data lakes, and in the cloud for more generalist access. If you think, for example, about a digital marketer who now has access to all customer transactional data through e-commerce tooling, for example, or the sales manager that can export all of their sales data from their CRM tool, even historical sales figures in finance software for the finance professional. And think even of all the myriad of different ways in which this data can be brought together and combined to arrive at really interesting intersections to investigate data junctions for further analysis. And then lastly, there's the notion of data education. Companies and individuals today are really realizing, mostly because there's these times in an individual's career or day to day where they realize that perhaps their skills are a little behind, that knowledge and these capabilities really do warrant investment of both time and capital, again, from the individual and also for the business to solve this gap of data education. And so it's really these three forces that are leading organizations to be more data-driven or data-led. And even more recently, I suppose, with the arrival and advent of all things COVID-19, there's definitely a few other truths that have been recorded. In Zapier's report, for example, this is a report that was produced this year in March. It was, again, around kind of the rise of no-code and low-code. An investigation was conducted on the use of these tools and its general effect on US businesses. Businesses and individuals were essentially surveyed to better understand the adoption and impact of these tools on businesses today. And a real significant discovery was that the majority of these new no-code users, in fact, 4 out of 5 of them in the survey, started using these tools for the first time during COVID, during the pandemic. Was this because they had more time on their hands for discovery? Was this because they weren't spending time in their daily commutes and they could, invest further on self-discovery and increasing, knowledge and education in areas of interest? Whatever the case may be, over the last couple of years, there's been a significant rise in the use of no-code and low-code tooling. Even further, 9 out of 10 of these no-code users thought that knowledge of the low-code technology itself and utilization of the low-code tools could go further to help their business grow and to grow faster. And of course, there were several other individual benefits that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen there. Positive recognition from the company and leadership, increased productivity, additional compensation, and in some cases, leading also to the likes of promotion. But it's not just the users who think that data democratization is important. A recent Google Cloud and Harvard Business Review paper confirmed that 97% of industry leaders think that democratizing access to data and analytics across the organization is important to overall business success. But in rather typical fashion, there's a significant disparity between what the people think and what leadership thinks. 60% of leaders assume that they were truly effective in giving employees access to data and analytics tools, but only 7%, a significant difference, that 60% of employees within the organization actually believed this really to be the case. And it's likely for this reason. While we're seeing some investment in data literacy programming for the generalist population, technology advancement, which is also accessible to the generalist population, is growing at such a rate that education and keeping current with these advances just simply can't keep up. And so where some firms are identifying the priority, the real delta between those firms that invest or choose to invest and those firms that don't invest is resulting essentially in increased competitiveness for those companies that choose to invest. And this competitiveness is something that Anu is due to speak to in the next few minutes. And so theoretical frameworks and surveys are all well and good, but do we actually see these forces at play and some of these results in the real business world and in real business use cases? And a good example is, early in their rise to stardom, Airbnb recognized that data-informed decision-making was absolutely imperative. The challenge was that their culture was grounded in the belief that every employee should be empowered to make data-informed decisions, but most were experienced and educated, like many others, in non-data related fields. So their response was actually to build an internal in-house data university. Without going into the details, the results of the initiative was that all employees were able to make better decisions that were grounded in reality or grounded in data. Employees were empowered also to self-serve the answers that they needed without a middle person, which in effect dramatically reduced the time to generation of insight and the ability to act on insight. And data science teams were freed up essentially to focus on the specialist activities that essentially they were hired to do in the first place. And so to bring kind of everything together that we've talked about so far, we're seeing the rise of this new category of data users, whereby data at the top of the pyramid, where there is a high dependency of sophisticated code and understanding of, where the data scientist resides. We also see at the middle of the pyramid, there's the data analyst that typically serves a individual business unit or perhaps an individual business leader who's more dependent on, low code rather than no code. We also now have this population of business users or data users, which we call the data citizen. And we essentially believe that every member of the business population is likely to become a member also of the data citizen movement, really in a necessary bid to remain adequately skilled. In working with finance teams over the years, we've actually witnessed some of these findings directly. Across a subset of 250 Kubicle enterprise finance customers, we've seen this data skill transformation take place firsthand. In 2015, for example, the typical finance tooling stack was Excel for data processing, Excel for data visualization, really Excel for everything. Number one tool, really the only tool being used in finance, pre-2015. In 2022, however, today, we're finding that some more adventurous finance professionals are even adopting the likes of Python for data processing, Tableau and Power BI for data visualization and more data storytelling to the generalist population. Alteryx, and it's okay if none of these terms really make sense to you today. We'll talk about some of them a little bit later, but Alteryx for data workflow automation. And many finance teams are even experimenting and implementing at large scale fashion, robotic process automation, also known as RPA. And again, if all of this is foreign to you, do not despair. It is for many, and we'll explore some of these a little later to bridge the divide. But the fact remains that utilization of these tools and technologies are significantly gaining traction. And in the case that I have yet to cement the argument for data literacy, this is a very interesting piece of research done by Gartner in 2020. Gartner essentially used the technology of web scraping. Now, this is the process of automatically grabbing large amounts of data from websites to analyze a total of 35 million job postings in IT, finance, and sales between 2017 and 2019. The purpose of this analysis was to identify the average number of core skills needed to meet the requirements of your average job. In 2017, as you can see from the slide, it was 12.6. Over a 4-year horizon, it was projected that of the 12.6 skills needed in 2017, only 8.4 of those same skills would be relevant in 2021. And an additional 10.1 skills would be needed or would needed to be gained that didn't exist in the skills profile only 4 years beforehand. The skills revolution is most definitely here. New skills are displacing old skills, and there's a rising demand for more skills. And so there lies kind of the micro case for data literacy. But the question is, what about more of the macro factors? We're seeing that there's a lot of larger responses that are being delivered on even the governmental level. And so to explain a little bit more of that, I hand over to Anu.
Thank you, Mark. So my name is Anu. Hello, everyone. I'm a senior account manager here at Kubicle, and a part of my role involves working with loads of L&D stakeholders, loads of chief digital transformation officers, and anyone who would often really struggle with showing, I suppose, ROI within upskilling. It's always been a challenging metric or a KPI for people within L&D to define. So when engaged with properly, we do know that data is a critical asset for any organization to stay competitive. What was missing was somehow this significant empirical effort to quantify the impact of data literacy on financial performance or on company profits. And knowing that businesses are a going concern, it was really important to sort of establish that connection. So we all perceive, I suppose, data literacy at a very individual we all perceive it as a very micro or a very employee or at an individual level. But what is corporate data literacy? It's kind of understanding it at a more organizational or at a more macro level. So by the typical Webster's definition, I suppose, for corporate data literacy, it is the ability of a company or an organization to read, analyze, utilize data for decision-making, argue with it, and communicate with it. And the most important element kind of throughout the organization. So interestingly enough, Click used Wharton Business School and the people at Wharton Business School, I think it was back in 2018, to do a really robust study and find how can we empirically measure data literacy at a corporate level. So they coined this term, which is called the Data Literacy Index, and it helps to measure corporate data literacy in the workplace. And it's calculated, or it primarily consists of these three wide pillars, right? So the first pillar, again, coming down to a more micro or individual level, is human capital. So at an employee level, it kind of encompasses, are we hiring people with the right skill set? Are we further investing time and energy into upskilling these people, further? Are we helping them sharpen, I suppose, their existing skill set to develop them to their maximum potential? The second pillar being data-driven decision-making. So you've done the first thing of hiring the right people. What do you do after, right? You have to enable them to use data for decision-making. And how that's usually done is through data education programs within organizations. And what a lot of them usually are missing is to help people identify and use data wherever needed within their role to make these decisions. And the third one, and I think the most important one, is data dispersion. So like, how widespread is really the use of data within your organization? Is it kind of across all levels of the organization? Is it being used in every department? Like, just not in clusters of specialist functions, right? Is it really being used to derive insights from the ground up? Is it percolating down to the middle and lower management? And is it being sent right all the way up to the top management, so it really truly has a positive or a direct impact on enterprise value? And hence the tie-in comes with the corporate decision-making. Next slide, please, Mark. So conclusively, what the Click study or the Data Literacy Index suggested, that there is hence a positive correlation between data literacy and enterprise value. So L&D people went, boom, there's your return on investment. This is how just digital upskilling will help you kind of tie that back into KPIs or metrics, and not just enterprise value. Like, there is a direct correlation coming from cost of sales, from gross margins, from return on assets, return on equity, depending on the kind of organization you are. The study, interestingly, had a few different other layered findings to itself as well. So fairly enough, the study was done across multiple geographies and across multiple verticals. And this positive correlation actually existed not only as a whole, but also individually in each geography and in each vertical. Europe actually holds the highest data literacy score globally. So most of the countries within Europe are sort of forerunners, or like running ahead with data literacy. The three countries that emerged the sharpest and the most mature nations when it came to corporate data literacy were the UK, France, and unsurprisingly, Germany. So high performers when it came to sort of corporate data literacy. And again, the same correlation with kind of return on assets and return on, of equity was observed across all of the organizations in these countries. Next slide, please, Mark. So having established all of that, what we further saw is that if the gap between the importance that companies are putting on data and their appreciation for kind of driving economic importance exists, where are they falling short? Like, where are the shortcomings? So the study found that the companies recognize the need for data are a good 63% of companies. So there was a survey that was kind of embedded as a part of this study, and 63% of companies agreed that, we plan to increase the number of data literate kind of champions or people within our organization to see this positive increase in our enterprise value. However, only 23% or 23.8% of these companies were really identifying the skills gap within their organization. Only 23.8% people really thought that they could read, write, or argue with data, as we define data literacy at the start. So companies that have this data were also struggling to turn this into usable information. So there were kind of layers of, I suppose, challenges that were that were existing within these little pockets. And data technologies, I think a couple of you mentioned before, you've used Power BI. So there is business intelligence tools, there is advanced analytics, there is data visualization tools. All of these are there in the organization, but they're not being utilized fully to hence have a positive or direct positive impact on enterprise value. Now, we've spoken about data literacy at a macro level, at an organizational level, at an individual level. Let's just go a step further and take it to, like, suppose the most macro level possible, which is at a national level. And really inspiring to see the UK with, the UK NDS driving this national data strategy. Like they're basically driving and building this like fully robust data strategy that truly encompasses the value of investing in data literacy as an organization or as an individual. So another study, as you can see, we're all fan of reading papers and studies here at Kubicle. So another study was published, and if you get the chance, do read it, a beautiful report by the NDS. It talks about the business challenges, and it points out about what really are the shortage of skills that exist in the workforce. And a part of that was to cover and deploy a whole plan to foresee what's coming in the next 5 and 10 years. Like, what can we do now as a country to develop and devise this whole robust national data strategy to meet for these shortage of skills in the future? So in 2019, the UK government, they opened a call for evidence and they ran this series of stakeholder engagements. 56% of the stakeholders suggested that they prefer upskilling their existing employees than hiring from outside, as in like hiring people with existing skills. And they preferred that they actually upskill their existing people. And needless to say, that has positive impacts, right? You have sort of your strategic assets of your employees that already have context to the business and have a buy-in into the enterprise value. And if you kind of help them upskill and get to a level that will directly help with profits, it's a win-win situation for everyone. So with that, it's a good time to segue back and let Mark take over and talk a little bit about a little poll that we have.
Excellent. Thanks, Anu. So what we're going to do is we're going to pause here for a second, and hopefully we've convinced you adequately that data literacy is something that everybody should focus on, wherever you reside and wherever your focus is, because it's a serious challenge. It's a serious challenge for the now and also for the future. But we want to understand how perhaps you are positioned within your own business or your perspectives of your own businesses as it pertains, or even as it pertains to you as an individual, but as it pertains to data literacy and data-driven decision-making. And there's typically 5 stages of adoption for the data-driven decision-making type of firm or type of organization. And that is, some organizations can be in data denial. They start with an active distrust of data and simply do not use it. Then there's kind of stage 2, which is data indifference. And that's where the company has no interest in whether data is collected or used. Stage 3, data aware. The business is collecting and may use it for monitoring, but does not base decisions on it. Stage 4, the business is data informed. Managers use data to selectively aid decision-making. And then there's the pinnacle of achievement, the data-driven business. And that's where data plays a central role in as many decisions as possible across the organization. So again, perhaps in the interest of time and intimacy, we can keep this to chat, or we can try out this fancy technology. Oh, I see that we have one data-driven organization, which is fabulous. Who can I put that person on the spot actually and ask, who was that? Or who is that? And what is that organization? Or was somebody just testing out the technology? That's okay too. Rightio. Should we go to chat and see? Okay, not really relevant as in my work as doing coaching and mentoring. Interesting. Okay. There's a 4 there. Not enough students have appropriate math skills for this. That is, that's a really interesting insight, actually. And again, based on some research and polling that was done on university students recently. I can't remember who released the report. I think it was done in conjunction actually with Tableau, but somewhere in the region of only 14% of students felt that they were adequately prepared on graduation to enter the workforce as it pertained to data literacy. And actually, one of the things that we do is we work with a lot of universities and university students, particularly in Ireland and in the US, to bridge the gap between the world of university and the real world of work. And so we're training quite a lot of students actually on the use of technologies, quite specifically within finance, because we're finding that a lot of finance teams are under a great deal of technical transformation at present. What else? The 3 and a 4. Use course feedback as opposed to hard data. Yeah, very good. We find that the kind of average response is kind of between the 3 and the 4, most certainly. So I think that's kind of mirrored in the responses there. Thank you. Great. So in the next section of our presentation, we're going to take some time to see how some of these technologies and some of these principles are helping businesses to become more competitive. Again, go from the world of research and polling into kind of the world of the real life. And I understand that some of it and some of the stuff that we'll introduce can seem a little bit more than science fiction than fact. But there are a myriad of examples, particularly through our experience working with big corporates and SMBs, to show how some of the core principles of data literacy are beneficial when turned into organizational-wide competencies. And actually, I think there was a comment there around not really relevant in my work as doing coaching and mentoring. One of the things that we think is relevant to pretty much everyone, it doesn't matter what you do or how you do it, but it's about really being a critical thinker. And critical thinking is one of these things whereby, you know, the premise is about being able to think about problems from different perspectives. It's objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a particular judgment. And I think this is one of the best examples of how a lack of critical thinking can potentially drive some of the substantially wrong conclusions. So what you see in front of you here is a World War II fighter plane, and it's just returned from battle. The red marks and the clusters of red marks are bullet holes, and the areas that presumably were prone to the most amount of enemy fire. To improve survival rates, the Allies sought to strengthen the most commonly damaged parts of these planes to reduce the number ultimately that were shot down, putting reinforcement in areas where there's the most amount of red, obviously. But there is a problem here. Is this, and this is a question for everybody, again, you can unmute yourselves, you can answer on the chat. Is this a reasonable conclusion? Feel free to share your thoughts. Yes, I love this one. It is a great illustration. I think people ultimately know the answer to this one then. If you don't know the answer, give it a shot.
This is the first time I've seen this diagram, and it's very interesting to see the analogy that's being drawn here. And I think, yeah, why not go for the engines? Why not go for the cockpit? Which is obviously highlighting the point of critical thinking, that there are other areas that potentially you need to kind of think from different elements and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's some great insights. I think Joe was thinking about the response, and he nailed it in his chat there, or in his response. And you know, there's a lot of different bias that exist in data analysis. Well, that exist in life, to be completely honest. But sometimes there is you know, selective bias, and that is you only derive a conclusion against the things or the information that's available to you, right? And so what we're looking at here is a data set of all the planes that returned from battle, right? And so the question is what about all the planes that didn't return from battle? They never made it to our data set, right? And funnily enough, if the response here is about saying, you know, what I've seen derives the conclusion that I should put reinforcement in all the areas of clusters of red, chances are I'm probably doing the wrong thing, right? I probably couldn't be more wrong, right? And so, you know, it goes back to this notion of critical thinking is so important in kind of every facet of life, right? To have a good balanced view, a good informative view, holistic view of the problem in order to derive the best conclusion. And so again, you know, democratization of data literacy, this is one of those things to think about, or one of many things to think about. Now, to go into a little bit more fiction rather than just, you know, what's accessible to all of us, which is, you know, better critical thinking. What about robots? You know, we referred to it earlier as RPA. RPA essentially stands for robotic process automation. But there's essentially some really accessible softwares available today where you can train your PC to complete pretty repetitive tasks through, again, low code, no code, point and click interface. One of those examples is, as you can see on your screen, UiPath. There may be, for example, a task that you complete where you open the same spreadsheet daily to enter details manually from a variety of different sources. Well, with RPA, you can basically train and instruct a robot, essentially a software sitting on your PC, to repeat those tasks on your behalf. And so RPA is now transforming the way a lot of functions, a lot of departments rather, get things done. Use cases are in finance, manufacturing, HR, general administration, pharmaceuticals. I mean, the list goes on and on. One of our customers, PwC, for example, has rolled out automation to more than 50,000 employees and counting now. I believe they have an ambition to have kind of a robot on every desktop or robot on every PC. And so to date, PwC has unlocked significant capacity for its staff, saving some in the region of 5 million hours previously spent on other tasks. And PwC is continuing the expansion of this initiative, looking to gain access, or at least provide access to RPA to all 270,000 employees. And what about artificial intelligence and, you know, NLP? What is NLP? It stands for natural language processing. But NLP is basically where computers can take action and draw some insights from large data sets of natural language, say, for example, from something like a phone transcript. Very fast-growing company by the name of Gong. They're based in Israel. I think they now have offices around the world, but their technology uses NLP and again, accessible purely through subscription and software. But they use machine learning to help train and suggest information to salespeople, customer service reps. Essentially, a sales rep can be on a phone call and the Gong technology can make real-time recommendations on how to improve perhaps the sales interaction, or recommend how to improve the real life negotiation, or even serve up, you know, learning in the flow of work. And that is, you know, to make recommendations, learning recommendations based on more real world interactions. It'll essentially, if you wanted to, draft up meeting notes and create tasks without the customer or rep having to invest any administrative time whatsoever. So again, some very sophisticated technology that is accessible to everybody. Granted, it's not free, but certainly very sophisticated and at the fingertips of many, should there be the agreed investment at the corporate level or the individual level. But relying on data without the right level of awareness can also get you into quite a great deal of trouble. So I took out a couple of kind of examples of maybe data literacy, or at least data technology and tooling gone wrong, right? Amazon developed some fancy AI recruiting. It was a tool that basically was built to favor men in an already male-dominated industry. There are many types of bias, and we discussed this a little bit previously with the critical thinking, but that exists specifically in AI. AI is really only as good as the data that you use to train it. Information bias, confirmation bias, selection bias, there are a few different bias that can lead to pretty poorly weighted outcomes. But in this particular instance, the Amazon team had been building a computer program for years to review applicant resumes, basically with the aim to save time and automate the search for top talent. A couple of years in, as they were kind of releasing and launching this initiative, the company realized that this new system was not necessarily rating candidates for developer jobs and other technical posts in a terribly gender neutral way. Their models were trained to vet applicants by looking at patterns in resumes that were submitted to the company over a period of 10, 15 years. And of course, because of the male-dominated nature of tech businesses and some of these development roles, most of the CVs came from men. So basically, they were training artificial intelligence with a data set that really only came from, a small segment of the population, or a material segment of the population, but it certainly didn't represent everybody. And it favored applicants essentially based on words like executed and captured. And these are words that they later found were more commonly found on men's resumes. So basically, Amazon taught through this artificial intelligence tool that male candidates were preferable. And it was essentially penalizing resumes that originated from women. I also think that this is a really good example of how data literacy training can improve some things at even the most basic and fundamental levels. But how about designing visualizations with total accessibility in mind? I mean, keep in mind that data literacy is a fully inclusive initiative. Studies have found that around 8% of men and 0.5% of women have color vision deficiency, CVD. And the experience of red-green colorblind, I'm going to show you actually on your screens here, for those who are red-green colorblind. Now, the irony here is that in data visualization, green generally means something positive and red generally means something negative. So differentiating between the two is absolutely crucial for that percentage of the population. Costly data errors, though, don't have to be all that complex to be costly. The most basic errors are sometimes the ones that cause the greatest amount of collateral damage. The London Olympics, you're probably familiar with this. A simple slip of the finger led to 10,000 extra tickets being sold and issued for a single swimming event. The difference in this instance between the number 1 and the number 2 can be just 1, or it can be multiples of 1. In this instance, it was 10,000 multiples of 1. And so we kind of share these good, bad, and ugly data literacy use cases because none of these transformative business initiatives or failings could have been identified and performed without the underlying fundamental knowledge of data. And so that kind of leads us to our third part of the presentation, bringing this close to a close, which is, what can be done in building data literacy individually or within your respective organizations. And so as any type of leader, we think that you should pose sort of 2 questions regularly to yourself. And that is, first off, are you aware of the data technologies that are used among your teams? And as leaders, are you also aware of the data technologies and the concepts that are emerging within your domain? As we represented earlier, a lot of domains, a lot of professional functions are under a severe degree of transformation given the rate of current technological advances or data technology advances. And so in Kubicle, we think of data literacy as kind of a 3-step process on top of some of those regular questions that you should pose. First off, to build a foundational understanding of key data principles and theory. We often talk about the benefit of having kind of a cocktail lounge level of understanding around some of the key data principles and technologies. Being able to identify where certain problems in the business or just in your professional life in general can be solved through some potential emerging technologies is sort of half the battle. And secondly, with data tools, business invest an enormous amount of capital regularly into emerging technologies, not just to maximize return on investment, but also impact on the business. And it's essential to have staff establish a common understanding of how and when these tools that cost a lot of money can be used. But most importantly, really being able to confidently transfer theory and data into knowledge, or into action rather, through application, is where the data citizen really kind of earns their stripes. This can be done in several different ways: simulated real-world projects, real-world challenges. There's a lot of kind of available data sets publicly available online for people to test their capabilities. There's a lot of different resources that are available at an individual's disposal. And so, the last question that we pose is, what can you do to kind of kickstart your organizational data literacy journey within your own respective organizations? And here's a few different recommendations. First of all, try and get kind of a general proxy of current skills. Fish around perhaps for examples where data-led decision-making has improved business outcomes, similar to perhaps some of those more advanced ones that we shared earlier, but they are pretty easy to find if you ask the right people. If they're tough to find, mind you, you're probably resting at a pretty low level. We use skill assessments within our application to get a baseline knowledge of key subjects, but there's also, through a simple Google search, lots of different questionnaires that are available online. Also try and find data advocates, or what are known, or who are known as data translators, individuals who are able to take sort of the complex data language and build it into a narrative that is understood by the general population. Third of all, communicate why data literacy is indeed important. Perhaps you can share the recording of this webinar, or dig up some examples of where data-led decision-making has made a real-world measurable impact. Of course, like any L&D initiative or transformative initiative, you've got to start small, take baby steps. Organizational-wide competencies are not built overnight, rarely in a year, as we find either. But to truly make an impact, specific learning paths and experiences should incorporate things like the fundamentals, the tools that are, again, available and invested in by the organization. Should also include an element of sort of critical thinking, communication and storytelling. And then, of course, lastly, the most important bit, real-life application, or at least the ability to practice that application. And if you get it right for the first group, you can build and sort of tweak your initiative from there. And lastly, without leadership buy-in, I think like anything in the business environment, if you don't have this, everything else will crumble. These initiatives do not only need to be supported at the top, but also be championed at the top, spoken about at the top for them to be successful. And so that brings us to the conclusion of our presentation. I suppose as a last slide, what I'm going to do is, this is very typical in the late show in Ireland, where, and I think actually Oprah might do this, or might have done this before in the past, where, one for everybody in the audience. But we are making available foundational Kubicle data literacy diploma for everybody in the audience. All you have to do is send, and don't worry, this is not necessarily a sales initiative. We just want to give something back and help you start your journey. But it is a inbox that we can utilize and take action on. Send an email to sales@kubicle.com. You can just say hello. All we need is your email address. We'll send you a link to register essentially into the diploma. It's available for a 3-month period, and you can basically learn about some of the kind of fundamentals and foundational elements of data literacy and kind of start your journey towards becoming a data citizen. Again, a capability and competency that we think to some extent everybody will need going forward. Thank you very much for your time. Happy to take any questions if we have time to do so.
Yeah, we do have time, Mark. First of all, thank you for that presentation. I love some real good messages in there. I love the bit about understanding the why in initiatives. I think if we understand the why, then I think you get a lot more engagement and buy-in from people. And I love that critical thinking piece there. It was it's interesting to for me anyway, to kind of almost kind of stop and think about the data that we have in the business. How can we use it in a perhaps more tangible way? So yeah, love those two messages in there, Mark. Thank you for that. Has anybody got any questions that they would like to ask Mark and Anu at this stage? We can go live. Unmute yourselves, please. We have got some time to field any questions.
Just me here. How are you finding engagement in terms of the employee hierarchical line? Does it generally start at the top and work through, or is it a certain level coming in?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, so that's a really good question, Me. Sorry, what's your real name?
It's Keen. It's Keen.
Keen, lovely to meet you. Thanks. Keen, yeah, really good question. Really good question. So in any learning and development initiative, engagement, particularly within the business and within business sponsored initiatives, is always the challenge, right? People are busy. Everybody is busy. People don't have time in most instances for lengthy training, that are, top-down directives of the business of the organization. And so for us, buy-in is really built using a couple of different unique mechanisms. First of all, and again, not to necessarily turn this into a sales pitch, but I think this is applicable across kind of all learning initiatives of similar nature, is that being cognizant of learner time is so incredibly important. We are of firm believers that the amount of time training is not always directly correlated to learning outcomes, right? So if you can build efficient and effective and engaging training programs that are perhaps in short duration, and the word micro-learning is bandied about quite regularly, you will find that adoption will be much greater. And that's because people today just generally don't have a lot of time in their hands, right? So being cognizant of that is kind of step number one. Step number two is kind of, and again, on kind of the increasing of the engagement side, is about making sure that the transformations that you want the individual to take on board are personable to the extent that they can understand what shift in behaviors and what individual benefit will actually come from adopting, or at least investing time and effort into this training. And so with a lot of the programs that we put together, we don't just say, hey, look, here's a training program for 1,000 people within your company. It's the same path that exists for everybody. We take stock of what the person knows to begin with, and we start everybody off at a different level because everybody's starting competency is different. If you've proven that you have that competency level at the outset, why relearn something that you can already apply in the real world and do it to a satisfactory level? And then at the same time, we try and make sure that there is enough customization in the training so that if somebody's in finance, or if somebody's in business intelligence, or if somebody is in tax, or if somebody's in audit, or if somebody's in a consulting role, or even an administrative role, that some of the application elements are actually brought down to the sector level so that people can see actually how that stuff that they've learned can be applied to be transformative in the business environment. So if you can make it relative and short for people, you will find engagement increase.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
No worries, Keen.
Brilliant. Thanks, Keen, for that. Anybody else got any questions? Andy, I know you've got to nip off at 12 for an appointment. Has anybody else got anything they would like to ask Mark or Anu? I take that silence as golden.
We're also going to leave our email addresses in the chat. So if you did want to reach out later with a question, that's okay too.
Excellent. Brilliant. Thanks, Anu. And thank you, everybody, for attending. Just to let you know that our next webinar coming up in August, date to be confirmed, it will be about the partnership that the CPD Standards Office has formed recently with the Institute of CPD as well. So the date will be confirmed with that, but it will be towards the back end of August. We've also got some coaching speakers also scheduled for September and October as well, which will talk about the measuring the impact of coaching and using innovative tools and techniques for coaching students and lifelong learners. So again, keep an eye out for dates to be confirmed for those 3 upcoming webinars. But I'd like to say, Mark, Anu, thank you very much for your time. Everybody, thank you for your time as well for tuning in. Enjoy the sunshine. I believe there's another heat wave coming, so make sure you factor up. And yeah, wish you all the best. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.